Hi there, I'm Ann Carmichael, and I'm presenting on behalf of LELA, Louisiana's nonprofit resource for FAFSA completion and college access. And I'm going to cover the college financial aid process. I would like to thank you for joining me, class of 2022, and I hope your parents were able to attend as well. Because college can be expensive, it's time to start thinking about and preparing for those costs, which include equipment, books, and supplies like your textbooks, notebooks, a computer if you need one, personal expenses like your phone bill, money to do laundry if you're living away from home, fuel for your car, and any food purchases that you might make outside of your meal plan. Room and board, which can include your dorm room if you're living on campus or an apartment if you're living off campus. And the big one, tuition and fees. Now, you probably will be aware of a college's tuition when you start doing your college searches, but you might not always be aware that there are quite a lot of fees that must be paid before you can begin your academic year. And these fees include parking, library, technology and athletic fees, and then campus transportation. Now, the good news is there are resources to help you pay for these expenses. There's the federal government, the state of Louisiana, your college or career school, and nonprofit and private organizations like LELA. In 2020, more than $115 billion in federal student aid was awarded, and we want to make sure that the class of 2022 receives their portion. Types of federal student aid to help you pay for your expenses are the federal Pell Grant, the federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, the Teacher Educational Assistance for College and Higher Education or TEACH grant, the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant, Federal Work Study, and direct subsidized, unsubsidized, and PLUS loans. Now, federal student aid grants are a form of financial aid that does not have to be repaid, so you never want to turn down a grant offer. The family of grants includes the Pell for undergraduates with financial need, FSCOGs for undergraduates with exceptional financial need, service grants for students of military parents who died defending the country following 9/11, and teach grants for students pursuing a teaching career. The Federal Work Study Program provides part-time jobs to help pay your college expenses. So when you say yes on the FAFSA to the Federal Work Study question, the Financial Aid Office will consider you for available jobs that they have on their campus. Now, your earnings from those jobs will be paid directly to you, the student, and should be used to pay for those college expenses. Federal work study jobs look great on your first professional resume. So if you're going to a four-year college and you accept a job, let's say in the bursar's office, you have 4 years of work history to report on that first professional resume. And that's exciting. That might give you an advantage over another applicant. Nobody wants to have to borrow, but if you can't complete your college degree without student loans, then they are a good investment. The important thing to remember is to only borrow what you need to complete each academic year. And it's important to understand the types of loans that you might be offered. The direct subsidized loan is based on financial need and no interest is charged until you graduate or cease to attend. These are known as need-based loans. On the other hand, almost everyone is eligible for the direct unsubsidized loans, regardless of their financial need. However, the interest begins to accrue on this loan once it's fully dispersed, which is usually in the spring of each academic year, and then throughout the life of the loan. So you can see that there is a big difference between direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Now, when you're offered loans by your financial aid office, you want to remember to accept the subsidized portion first. And you can do this by telling yourself that the U in unsubsidized means that you always pay the interest on this type of loan. If you do make the decision to accept student loans to help pay your college expenses, you'll want to accept the federal student loans first because payments aren't due until you graduate or cease to attend. The interest rate is fixed at a lower rate and no credit check is required. Private loans, on the other hand, should be accepted only as needed because many require that payments be made while you're still in school. The interest rate could be variable and often it's much higher, and they almost always require a cosigner. So, students and families, do your research before selecting a private loan lender. Um, because interest rates can vary and also incentives to borrow um, can vary as well. Where can you use all of this student financial aid? Well, at public and private four-year colleges, community colleges, career and technical schools. You can use them for part-time classes or to take online college courses. But it's important to know that all federal student aid and most institutional and private aid is contingent upon completion of the free application for federal student aid known as the FAFSA. Now, this form launches October 1st of every year. And yes, you do have to complete a FAFSA every year that you're in college. And remember that student financial aid is awarded on a first come, first served basis. So you want to get yours submitted as soon as possible. Go ahead and mark your calendar for October 1st and be at the head of the line. Remember to pay close attention to the FAFSA deadlines that are going to be imposed by your colleges, the state of Louisiana, and yes, the top scholarship can be applied for just by submitting your FAFSA. And there is a FAFSA deadline for that scholarship as well. There are federal deadlines, and also check with your high school counselor, especially if you're attending a public high school in Louisiana, because FAFSA submission is a graduation requirement, and your school might have a FAFSA deadline. You'll begin the FAFSA process by collecting all of the documents that you're going to need to complete the form. And if you do this, it really should take no longer than about 30 minutes to submit your FAFSA. These documents include the student and parents' social security cards because the FSA ID and FAFSA must reflect the names and numbers exactly as printed on your most recent social security card. Student and parents' 2020 federal income tax returns if you filed one. Now, if you don't have a copy with you, contact your tax preparer for a duplicate copy so that you'll have that with you when you're ready to begin the FAFSA process. You'll need the student and parents' 2020 W-2s because there's information on this form that might not be found on your federal income tax return. And gather your bank statements and records of investments because you must report the balances of these accounts as of the date you submit your FAFSA. Begin creating the federal student aid ID at fsaid.ed.gov. This is going to allow students and parents to electronically sign their FAFSAs. The FSA ID consists of a unique username and a password that the student and one of his parents will create themselves. Make sure that you're only using your own personal information. If you share information, say student uses mom or dad's mobile phone as the alternate phone number in their FSA ID, this is a common cause of students not being able to sign and get their faxes submitted. So don't share any information. And remember to use your personal email addresses, students and parents too. If you are using a business email address, mom and dad, your communication from federal student aid could get caught up in a spam filter. And students, if you're using your school ID, you're not going to be able to get communication from federal student aid once you graduate because your school ID, your school email address is going to be disabled when you graduate. Remember that your FSA ID username and password is your official electronic signature for federal student aid documents, and it's legally binding. So record it, keep it in a safe place, and don't share it with anyone. If you don't have access to a computer when you're ready to get started on your FAFSA, you can always download the FAFSA mobile app. It's called My Student Aid, and it's really easy to use to submit your FAFSA on your mobile devices. Or if you prefer, you can use the web-based version at fafsa.gov. Now, if you'd like to use both, perhaps you want to get started on the mobile app and you want to pick back up on your web-based version once you have access to your desktop or laptop. Or say the student likes the app, but mom and dad prefer to use the web-based version. That's fine. You can switch back and forth, and all the information will be integrated when it's time to sign and submit. Now, you want to begin the FAFSA by logging in with the student's FSA ID because the FAFSA is the student's application for federal student aid. The parent FSA ID will be used later in the process if you choose to transfer your tax information from the IRS into the FAFSA and then again to sign the student's FAFSA. Now, class of 2022, you should be completing the 2022-2023 FAFSA. And that's because that's the academic year that you're applying for financial aid. When you get into the form, you'll find that there are 8 sections that should be completed before submitting the FAFSA. You'll begin with student demographics, where the student will be asked to provide his social security number, name, date of birth, email address, home address, residency status, and gender. Then you'll move to the school selection section, where you will list the name of your high school, any colleges that you want your FAFSA data to be sent to, and your housing plans on each of those campuses. In the dependency status section, the student will be asked to consider a list of 10 questions that will determine whether he is dependent or independent of his parents for FAFSA purposes. He'll be asked to report the number of dependents living in his household and his parents' education completion level. Now, this is important because a student who is a first generation college graduate could be offered additional assistance to help him through his college career. Next, you'll move to parent demographics, where parents will report their social security numbers, um, their names, their marital status, their email addresses, and then you move on into the parent and student financials, where you will both be asked to report your working wages from 2020, any federal benefits that you receive, and savings and investment account balances. And then it's time to sign and submit your FAFSA. And once you do so, you'll receive a confirmation that it's been submitted. Now, as you move through the FAFSA, if you have questions about a question, look over to the right-hand side and you'll see a question mark. You can always click on that question mark for a better description of what is required. You can use the hyperlinks that are provided throughout the format to educate you on maybe some legal terms or financial aid terms that you've not heard of before. You can request a FAFSA online chat, call Federal Student Aid, or call us directly on Leela's FAFSA helpline. Now, for this session, only going to cover the most commonly asked FAFSA questions. But if you have one that I don't address, please feel free to contact me directly, and I'm going to leave my email address and the FAFSA helpline information at the end of the presentation. Students must be U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens to complete a FAFSA. If you're not a citizen, but you think you could be an eligible non-citizen, this is one of the hyperlinks. You can click on that to get a list of those who are eligible but are not citizens yet. Now, if a student falls into this category of citizen or eligible non-citizen, but his parents do not, that student can still submit a FAFSA. They will just provide zeros anywhere a parent's social security number is asked for. Young men between the ages of 18 and 26 must be registered with Selective Service to be eligible for federal student aid. So if you haven't turned 18 yet, and you haven't registered with Selective Service, that's fine. You can do so within the FAFSA itself. And once you turn 18, you will automatically be registered. It's important to remember that only the colleges that you list in your FAFSA in that school selection section are going to consider you for student financial aid. They're not just going to send your personal and financial aid, financial information out to every college across the country. You have to give them permission to do so. So add as many colleges as you're planning to apply to. You can add up to 10 at a time. And if you plan to apply to more than 10 colleges, there are instructions in this section to help you do that. And now I would like to talk to you about the 10 questions that students are going to be asked to consider when they get to that dependency status section. The first one, and remember these are in the student's perspective. So is the student 24 or older by January 1st of the school year for which he's applying for aid? Is he married or separated but not divorced? Will he be working on a graduate degree? Does he have children who receive more than half of their financial support from him? Does he have dependents other than children or a spouse who live with him, receive more than half of their support from him? Is he currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? So if a student is graduating high school and going on into boot camp or basic training, that's considered training purposes. So you still will have to answer no to this question when you're completing your FAFSA. Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? At any time since you turned 13, were both of your parents deceased? Or were you in foster care? Or were you a ward or a dependent of the court? Are you an emancipated minor, or are you in legal guardianship as determined by a court? And remember that legal custody is not always considered legal guardianship. So students should review their documentation before answering these questions. And then the last one, are you the student an unaccompanied youth who is homeless, or are you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? If you think you could be in this category, contact your high school counselor and find out if your school district has information about your situation. Now, if a student can answer yes to just one of these questions and provide a legal document supporting that claim, then he's considered an independent student for FAFSA purposes and will not be required to provide parental information. Now, if you're not in legal guardianship and you live with your grandparents or other relatives or persons and they have not legally adopted you, you must provide information about your legal parents. And if you have questions about this, you can always contact me directly, and I'll be happy to work with you through that process. For FAFSA purposes, you're not considered an independent student simply because you file your own taxes or you live alone and support yourself. However, if you are in a unique situation where you were forced into that situation, you can contact your financial aid office and begin an appeal. And the question we're most often asked is, who is my parent when I fill out the FAFSA? The rule of thumb is that the parent or parents that you've lived with the longest in the past 12 months should be listed on your FAFSA. So if you live with both of your biological parents, then you'll want to list them both. But if the parent that you've lived with the longest in the past 12 months is either separated, divorced, or was never married, then you should list only that parent on your FAFSA. However, if that parent is remarried, you must now include his or her spouse. In other words, federal student aid wants to know the financial standing of the household that the student has lived in the longest and the 12 months prior to the date that the FAFSA was submitted. Now, if you're identified as a dependent student, but your parents refuse to provide your information, you can submit your FAFSA stating, I'm unable to provide parental information about my parents. And go ahead and get your FAFSA submitted, but then it's your responsibility to contact the financial aid office to discuss your situation. If not, you are going to only be offered student loans. So make sure you're completing that important step. Now, to make the FAFSA process go a lot smoother and reduce your chances of being selected for verification on your college campus, consider using the Internal Revenue Service's data retrieval tool. This will help you to go into the IRS website itself, grab your 2020 information from that tax return, and drop it right down into your FAFSA. This is going to save you time and also probably save you from perhaps making some errors as you manually enter that information. You'll find once you link to the IRS, you'll be right there in the IRS portal. You'll provide the name, date of birth, street address, city and state exactly as it is printed on your 2020 tax return. That's why you need to have that tax return in front of you, because even if that information was entered incorrectly on the tax return, and we've seen situations where the tax preparer might have entered the wrong address or zip code, etc., you need to provide exactly what's on that 2020 tax return when you're into the website of the IRS to make sure that you're successful in using this tool. Then it's almost time to sign and submit your FAFSA, but please make sure that you are reviewing your student aid report to make sure that all your information is correct before it's sent over to your financial aid offices. Once you've made any corrections that you need to do so, you'll be taken here to the signature page. The student will use his federal student aid ID or FSA ID to electronically sign his FAFSA, and the parent that created an FSA ID for themselves will also be asked to electronically sign. Then you can submit your FAFSA, and you will automatically receive a FAFSA confirmation page. And this page is going to tell you the next steps that you need to take before completing the financial aid process. You'll see a list of the colleges that are going to receive your FAFSA data, and you can review your financial aid estimates. But remember, these are only estimates. Your college financial aid offices are going to provide you with your aid offer. Once your FAFSA is fully processed, it's going to be shared with your colleges, and they will begin to identify any aid that you might be eligible to receive. Now, if you want to add a school, change your contact info, or make any changes to your FAFSA that maybe were requested by your college, just log into the FAFSA itself, make those changes, but remember to sign and submit your FAFSA when you do so. If your family's financial situation has changed since 2020, and we know this is going to be the case in many instances, contact your financial aid office because they have the ability to adjust your aid if you meet their criteria, and they could find some additional monies available to help you complete your academic year because they're trying to determine your net price. They're going to do this by subtracting any grants and scholarships that you're eligible for from your cost of attendance on their campus. That net price is your responsibility, and you can either pay it in cash or accept student loans to pay that balance. Your student aid offer is going to reflect your college's cost of attendance, and it should line item any grants, scholarships, student loans, work study that they can offer you. And remember that you'll receive a financial aid offer from each of the colleges that you've listed on your FAFSA. Once you do decide which school you're going to attend, you'll want to accept your aid in this order. Scholarships and grants, because this is gift aid that doesn't have to be repaid. Federal work study, because this is earned money that doesn't have to be paid back. Then student loans, because this is borrowed money and it must be repaid with interest. Now, scholarships are gifts that don't have to be repaid, and it's time to get started on that this summer. There are a lot of scholarships that have summer deadlines. You'll find that there are scholarships everywhere once you start looking. They can be offered by your colleges, your employers, your parents' employers, private companies, nonprofits, community organizations, and religious groups. Some are merit-based and some are need-based. A scholarship could cover the entire cost of your tuition, or it could be a one-time award. Either way, it's worth applying for because if you do win them, they will reduce the cost of your education, and bottom line, that means less financial student loan debt. So check with your high school counselors, your college financial aid and admissions offices. Check out your local library. You'll want to make sure that you're starting to look locally for scholarships, then span out to regional and state scholarships, and then start looking nationally. Leela is offering a $1,000 FAFSA completion scholarships for seniors who've completed their FAFSA and are attending a Louisiana high school, and a $1,000 Choose Louisiana scholarship for students attending a college in Louisiana. You can visit leela.org for the details and the scholarship applications. Now, for students or parents who need additional help paying for college after they've exhausted all the opportunities for scholarships, grants, federal and state dollars, Leela administers a nonprofit education loan program. It's called Leela Choice, and it's for Louisiana residents. You can find out all about this program at leelachoice.org. As I mentioned earlier, remember to keep receiving financial aid. You must complete the FAFSA every year that you are in college. We're always available to answer your questions. And if we don't have those answers, we will find somebody who can. So please jot down my phone number. It's 800-463-2372. This is Leela's FAFSA helpline, and I'll be happy to speak with you when you call. Whether it's a general financial aid question or you would like me to stay on the line with you while you complete your FAFSA, I'm available to help. If you want to reach me by email, you can do so at carmichael@leela.org. So thanks again